let's talk about paraphrasing. Who can tell me what it means to paraphrase? Does anybody know what that is? Good. Sophia says it's a rewording. Good. Anybody else want to help? Other info about Isaiah says to say what someone said in a new way. Yes, also good. Yeah. Have you done paraphrasing before? Has anyone practiced paraphrasing? Oh, well, in screw tape, that was kind of summarizing. But yes, we summarize. So summarizing is taking a big chunk and really shortening it down, which is very similar, but paraphrase is more like taking a sentence and just turning it into a different sentence. But yeah, good point. All right, so how do you paraphrase? First of all, I guess we kind of already answered that a little bit because we talked about rewording, but it's very important that we do it correctly. All right, so see my picture here of peas and carrots, right? Why in the world would I use a picture of peas and carrots to talk about paraphrasing? So you can see that they're peas and carrots. Now, if I take all those peas and carrots and I dump them into I dump them into a blender and I blend them all up, are they still peas and carrots? They are peas and carrots still. No, they still are peas and carrots, but yes, exactly, Emma, in a different form, right? So a paraphrase works the same way, and it would be gross, yes. A paraphrase works the same way. We take words that an author said, so a sentence from Dunbar's book, for example, and we blend those words all up and we spit them back out or dump them back out of the blender. And they're the same words. Well, okay, not the same words. The content is the same, but it's completely different. So it's reworded, it's also reorganized, restructured. So the sentence structure is different and the wording is different, but the information is still there. You see that how that works? So what if I put my peas and my carrots in the blender and I just went and that was it, and then I dumped them out and they were still really chunky? First of all, that's kind of gross. But let's say they were still really chunky. Would that be an effective paraphrase? Not really, because it's still too much like the original peas and carrots, right? So a paraphrase, we want to really get in there and grind them up and change them, okay? But the content is still the same. Now, because of that, once I change my quote around, I rearrange the sentence, I change the words, I make it my own, the way I would talk, the way I would say it. Do I need to put a citation at the end? Do I put Dunbar and the page number? I have some yeses and some nos. Some yeses and some nos. We do put a citation because the information still came from that page in Dunbar's book. Do you see? So it's still her info. I worded it differently, but it's still her info. So I have to still give her credit for that. Does that make sense? Exactly, her idea. That's right. So if these were green giant peas and carrots and you blended them all up, they're still green giant peas and carrots, right? We still have to give credit to Green Giant or whatever brand it is that made the canned the peas and carrots. All right. So why would we even need to paraphrase in the first place? Why can't we just put quotes every time? Why is paraphrasing even necessary? You guys have gotten so good at integrating quotes. Maybe you should just do that, right? No guesses? Sophia says it can help you understand what the author is saying. Yeah, sometimes what the author's saying is complicated, right? And it's written in a way that's difficult to understand. So, exactly, if you paraphrase it, you put it into simpler terms, it can make more sense for the reader. So, yeah, good. Emmeline says it's like you made a spin-off of the light bulb. You should still give credit to Thomas Edison. There you go. Exactly. Exactly. So, why else might we paraphrase? It does help us sometimes to understand the information better. If you're using a quote in a paper and it's just, yeah, good. So Sophia says you can change it up from just quotes. Like sometimes, you just get too many quotes. And sometimes your quote doesn't fit well, right? So let's look at a couple of different times. So a direct, yeah, exactly. Good, Cohen. Cohen says you can get rid of unnecessary information. Like maybe you don't want all that in there. Maybe you just need certain parts of it. So good. So a direct quotation isn't always our best option. So we want to quote when the wording is quote worthy. In other words, this sentence was Dunbar said this sentence so well. Like I could not say this any better myself. It makes perfect sense. It fits into my paper. I've just got to have it the way she wrote it. It's perfect. Okay. We should quote that. Sometimes, though, a quote doesn't fit well into our paragraph. So, quote when the wording flows well with your paragraph. But, sometimes it's hard to integrate a quote, right? We've all been there, haven't we? It's hard to really get it blended with our own words. And sometimes when we integrate the quote, we have to use so many brackets to change so many things that it starts to look obnoxious, right? It gets cluttery and it's kind of clunky to read. So if it doesn't flow well, then that's a good time for a paraphrase. Right? Just say it your own way and don't worry about the brackets and the quotes and the integrating and all that kind of stuff. So if the quote is especially long, or if it's confusing, or if it just doesn't integrate well, that's a good time for a paraphrase. Isn't that great that you have that extra tool? Woohoo! But don't forget that it still requires a citation because the information still came from that author on that page. All right, so let's look at an example. Are you ready? This might have been the very first time that life circumstances smiled upon Rit, reminding her that although trapped in the web of human bondage, she too could carve out a bit of happiness. That's a really long and unnecessarily complicated sentence. It's a great sentence, but if I'm going to use it in my paper, I might not need all that, right? So let's take it apart. The first thing we have to do, if we're going to paraphrase, is understand what the sentence means. Okay. I have to know what the contents of my bowl up here are, because once it's all mixed up, I won't be able to recognize it anymore, right? All right. So I have to understand what the sentence says. So let's take it apart. This might have been the very first time that life circumstances smiled upon Rit. What does that mean? What does it mean for life circumstances to smile upon her? That's very poetic language, but what does it really mean? Yeah, life went her way. The first time maybe she got lucky. Yeah, those are good. See that? So maybe this was the first time things went well for her, right? All right, let's look at the next part of the sentence. Reminding her that although trapped in the web of human bondage, what does that mean, trapped in the web of human bondage? She was a slave, exactly. Yeah, good, Micah. So even though she was a slave, right? Good. She too could carve out a bit of happiness. What does it mean to carve out a bit of happiness? Like, keep it simple. Yeah, she could still find joy. Exactly, Emmeline. Good. Right, Sophia. So, yeah, we don't have to say it in a fancy way. We can just keep it simple. She could be happy, right? All right. So, if we just change some words, here's what we get. This was probably the first time that life was good to Rit, and it reminded her that even though she was enslaved, she could still have happiness. What's wrong with that? I have a citation. I've changed the words. Why is that not an effective paraphrase? Why is it wrong? Any guesses? It is still really close, isn't it? You're right. It's still too much like the peas and carrots. Oh, good. Oh, I'm glad you brought up the quotation marks, Cohen. Do we put quotation marks around a paraphrase? No, no, we don't. Why do we not put quotation marks around a paraphrase? Because it's not a direct quote. Exactly. So, since it's not exactly the way Dunbar said it, we don't use quotation marks. But I'm so glad you mentioned that because I forgot to talk about that. So, thank you. And let's look, let's see. Sophia mentioned that the sentence structure is the same, right? So, see how in the quote, this might have been the very first time that life circumstances smiled upon Rit, comma. And in mine, this was probably the first time that life was good to Rit, comma. Then reminding her that although trapped in the web of human bondage, comma, I've got, and it reminded her that even though she was enslaved, comma, see, it's almost identical. She too could carve out a bit of happiness. I've got, she could have happiness. So I've kept the same sentence structure and just changed out some words, right? So that is not good. That is not a paraphrase. Instead, I need to say it the way I would say it. All right. So if I just read it and then set it aside and I wasn't even looking at it and I just explained to you what it said, I would get something like this. Even though Rit's life as a slave had been terrible so far, she did find some joy through her marriage to Ben Ross. Now, I also added one little detail to my paraphrase here. And what was that? The marriage. And that's helpful because now there's some context. Now, if I use this in my paper, you understand why she's happy, right? It's because of her marriage to Ben Ross. So I can take that idea that Dunbar started, I can add a little to it. And I don't want to add too much because then it's not Dunbar's anymore. But Dunbar did say that on page 13. So I'm okay to do that. But I don't have to put every little detail that's in the quote. I just have to sum up the gist of it, right? In a way that I would say it. And if you want to look at some great examples of paraphrasing, read different translations of the Bible. So if you've ever been in church or Bible study or Sunday school or whatever, and you're looking at your Bible and whoever's reading is reading a different translation, you're hearing one translation, but your eyes are seeing another one. All that is a paraphrase, right? So different way of wording the same information, right? And that's what we're looking at doing. Think of it as you're writing a different translation of what that author said. Okay? You ready to practice? So